Greetings, everybody. Welcome to another wonderful evening of the Windfall Reading Series. It's gorgeous here in Eugene. I hope it's beautiful wherever you are. And if you're not here live, welcome to afterwards. So we're really glad you could be here. It's going to be a lovely evening. My name's Wendy. I work at the Eugene Public Library, and we are a sponsor of the Windfall Reading Series. Before we get started, just a couple quick things, then we'll get to the authors, and we'll also introduce Henry Alley, who leads the Windfall Reading Series for the Lane Literary Guild. The first thing is a couple of thank yous. First, to the Lane Literary Guild, without which we would not be doing this. Thank you so much for all the good programs you put on, all the support you give to local authors, authors outside the borders of Lane County. Wonderful group of people, and we can't thank you enough. I also wanted to thank a couple library entities that make programs and so many things possible. Both the Friends of the Eugene Public Library and the Eugene Public Library Foundation. Both groups, and there are some overlaps, are fantastic. They support the library, they support the community, they fundraise wonderfully, and they just allow us to do all the wonderful programs and services and outreach. Books, some of our large print books would not be on the shelf without them. Countless things they do, and we can't thank them enough for their support and their wonderfulness. So thank you very much for that. So at the end of the reading, we will invite people to offer their questions, to offer their comments, their thoughts. You can do this two ways throughout the reading. So you are welcome to leave your question or your comment, your observation right below this screen. You can do it right in YouTube if you wish, and we will read it at the end of the program. Or you could email me. You're welcome to email me at work, and let me just pop up my email address here. There it is, and I believe it's also going to show up below the screen. So feel free to email me. You can use your name. You can use an exciting pseudonym. I've always favored Simone because it's so mysterious. But go ahead and feel free to do that, and I will gladly read your comments or questions at the end as well. So either way, you can get your questions out there. And I think that's it. I would now like to introduce Henry Alley. Bring him to the floor. Hello, Henry.
Hi, Wendy. Thanks again for all the support the library gives us. I wanted just to give you kind of an overview of what we do at the Lane Literary Guild and also for the Windfall series. We're really appreciative of the fact that over the years we have been able to support literary activity on a variety of planes throughout the Lane County and even throughout the Oregon area. The Lane Literary Guild was established back in 1984 by one of our great pioneers, Ingrid Wendt, who is here tonight to read, which is entirely fitting, and also Bill Sweet. And I happened to be around in 1984 and was working with the Guild in its formative years, which was a great privilege. I even remember our first reading was with Bill Stafford, and it was quite a wonderful inaugural for all of us. Over the years, the Guild has supported literary activity in the field of autobiography, in the field of fiction, in the field of poetry, in the field of memoir, and we have actually had a number of various critique groups that have profited from each other, and we still actually have a series of critique groups that are under the umbrella of the Lane Literary Guild. You can find out more about our activity by tapping into the our Lane Writers URL, which Wendy has very nicely put on the screen here, and find out what other kinds of literary activity are going on, not only with relationship to the Guild, but to other areas in our Oregon Lane County area. Around the 1990s, Tim Whitsel, who is going to be reading for us tonight, initiated our Windfall series, which involved a pairing up of two distinguished writers who each month would read for us. And it has been such a strong part of the Guild's vision to have these people present and be available to our nearby public here. and it has continued over the years, and we're really happy to be able to sustain that tradition, even though we've had to go virtual, which has had some really wonderful positive effects as well. So tonight we're going to introduce, hopefully, Tim Whitsel if he's available, and I want to talk a little bit about Tim before he reads for us. But Tim is a journeyman writer from Fort Wayne. Uh, his years since high school have been spent almost entirely on the West Coast, where long ago he studied with Stanley Plumley, David Wagner, Meredith Steinbeck, Colleen McElroy. He has been a member of Eugene's Poetry One critique group for more than 20 years. And the late Eric Muller published his chapbook, We Say Ourselves, under his Trap Rock imprint in 2012. Arley Press published his first full-length book, Wish Meal, in October 2016. He is currently circulating a new manuscript of poems entitled After Pink Moon. His poem Hanging was published in the last issue of December, and the poem Waterfront appeared in the previous issue of Critique. For 6 years, he directed Windfall. And there's a couple things I want to say, too, about Tim. First of all, is that when he was introducing the series of Windfall and he'd introduced the two writers, he gave an enormous amount of time to the introductions, and they were really very skilled, carefully crafted biographical in overviews, and we always look forward to his special way of introducing our writers. The other thing I want to say is that about his poetry, he has some surprising juxtapositions in his latest published book. We have a dying person, for example, juxtaposed to sap rising in cherry trees. It was just this very, very touching side-by-side presentation. And then we have phrases like the hymn of the loose sky, or the torsos of beach, and he's talking about the beech trees. And so in Tim, we have to be ready for these surprises and these really nice images. So if he is available now, we'd like to hear from Tim Whitsel.
Thank you, Hank, and thank you also to the Eugene Public Library, Wendy, for sustaining this reading series during this time that we haven't been able to get together in person. The first poem I'm going to read this evening is an Easter poem. We just passed through that season again. And this actually comes from the period, the spring right before COVID and all that thing happened. It's set in Sintra, Portugal, a small town about an hour outside of Lisbon. And there are some famous, beautiful castles in bright color castles up on the hill. Easter Sunday, Sintra. My kids are not God-fearing people. They fear the people of God. Decades ahead, they could risk holy counter instants, sensing steps just ahead, behind. For now, my kids know to dread the holy police. Evangelist Billy Club or laser penny mom will not sprout fig or flower grape bud. Myanmar rifle butts will root no olive grove when buried, nor lifted stir the Milky Way. A poem called Backing Away, which is sort of an existential gardener poem, backing away. Slugs float in cheap beer I stationed in empty sour cream containers yesterday. I stew in a brew of small questions, not sure if the bold hosta leaves and lily stalks that surround me root for my pleasure, or to satisfy uncounted others. All in the soup of slighted hours where every moment feels like something on a menu too tedious to mouth again. Is there a moment of forgiveness as those slugs saturate? Asked like I'm above the clouds while clouds of DDT or neonicotinoids infiltrate marshes and canyons. Pestilence, native or invasive. Yesterday, I saw small-minded yellow jackets return to the plastic compost tumbler, entering and exiting the same black holes as uncles and brothers last summer. I pause with my lethal, non-poisonous foam. Other hornets enlist dark caves lodging behind all the vehicle side mirrors in the driveway. Whose driveway? Watershed, galaxy. To what end? The next poem is the title poem of the manuscript that I've been shopping called After Pink Moon. And we just had a pink moon, super moon this past weekend. There was one in April also. This is from the first April pink moon during the pandemic. Pink moon. I wish I let myself skip like I could when I still went to summer camp. I wish this clutter resembled a creek chuckling over the feet of an ouzel. But my soul circles like a vulture, dialing its sky lens over the fresh killed dough. A mauled treble clef, not perfect for the butcher house, but perfect for last night's ambling in the light of a huge pink moon. I dig down and bury these hybrid pink lily bulbs as a relic for her stroll from the back swale across the road where golfers glimpse each other's drives, putts, chips, 6 feet apart. I wish I could skim hedges like a doe. Letter from home. Your sigh is a long hinge. Don't get in a lather who you just lost. The kilometers of unreachable parklands and canyons do not subtract from your door prize. Set the carved door down here if you need a rest. Fresh surroundings encroach. Unfamiliars beat a path where no one tries tossing the morning news into the junipers from a passing bike. Hold the stiles firmly with both hands. Your palms sweat. You had no idea leaving would escape you. A poem for my Aunt Nancy, Aunt later. I thought of her while picking the right spoon to stir honey in my tea. I thought of silverware, flatware, and hot annoyance in my marriage. I thought how the pattern we settled for finally would match the drawer pulls we'd choose later without knowing, without trying. I thought of her and him and wondered if anyone sends them Christmas cards, if they know how to read anymore without trying. I wonder what happened to their silver-plated knives and forks and spoons when they could no more keep house and honey was crystallized when they found it. Utility. This is a poem that starts with those 3-part folded fans that were in the back of church pews and in the churches that I attended in my childhood. Utility. Last Supper trifold fans racked on dark pews, or fans with Jesus praying that garden prayer, kneeling by a rock in Gethsemane. Tired cardboard pushing a local funeral home. Sweltering faith fans fell to mass graves. Worship centers now boast climate control. Powder-coated upholstered chairs linked to one another. So a useless fan. And the funeral home is no dwelling. The meadow of blue camas shifting, a black-eyed Susan chorus, or acres of chicory etch a better sill between what says our name and what ushers darkness. The hewn rock style proving a door existed. The playground swing just after the kids have carried their talk past the corner of the fence. The prayers you compose when there is nothing to hear. A poem about stargazing set over in South Central Oregon, an experience I had some years ago in September at Summer Lake. It's called Dark Basin. Minutes like decades, getting the volunteers' telescope to dial in the planet Saturn. Let me try that again. Minutes like decades, getting the volunteers' telescope to dial in the planet Saturn. Seeing if one could see the glowing rings, we'd caravanned to this unpolluted dark. I got more star flash bobbing for apples once in a ring of dark water, a brash dunk for an Anabaptist kid who wouldn't come to see for decades. His orbit swung towards ancient Sequoia or Dalai Lama pop. Other nights, Indiana sons muttered prayers to mud flap silhouette maidens or a Raquel Welch poster. How often a trace of spring flush can follow me, haunting the final days of all Septembers. Our biggest planet is an albino fawn gyroscope, aglow in the dark steel tub of the cosmos. No northern spy or pale breast I could bump with my eager face. This is a poem about community or lack thereof. Lesson in plural wings. If God wanted man to fly, she would have given mothers wings. We are less alike than we'd like to think. It takes guts to brave a week with children and no swimming pools open. When they open, we will take lessons again how to touch each other, or the train will capsize and we will overwhelm our own lines with unseen Luftwaffe. Add soulless kisses to the virus's scars in our lungs. Forgive the mothers for not flying. Give to the community pool like your likeness depended on it. Stand apart, show some class, forego the manic wing beats over imaginary birches. Two more. A poem that I wrote with my three children who are now adults in lives of their own. And it's called Fingering. This will always be your dwelling, I say, more when you're far from here. This fear of losing place in our story, less than an 8-year-old's pair of lace-up cowgirl boots next to the black telephone. We are all mares sidling the paddock of some heart, listening for footsteps, keening for carrots, waiting for the steel warble of an old phone's ring. It feels good to put your finger in the holes and dial that number, even if it goes nowhere, as our breaths dilate the nostrils of morning. And I finish with a poem about travel and some big distances. And I've read previous versions of it, but I dedicate this one to my new friend from Morocco, Joseph, who I've come to know because of my dog Rio at the dog park, Armitage Dog Park. And the new title for this last poem is Giant Steps. Giant Steps is a landmark composition recording by the great American jazz saxophonist John Coltrane, Giant Steps. And it starts in Amsterdam. What else do you need to know? Oh, okay, so Amsterdam has canals above ground, right? Or that you can see. And the entire north of Africa has these subterranean canals called canals, which move water from places where it occurs to places where it's needed for farming. Canals. Here we go, Giant Steps. Bike to Amy Winehouse or a Bach sonata gliding by windowlit canals in Amsterdam mist. I fathom this mania for tulips, bright lanes of exaltation. My scapula twinges for the bird it was destined to be. No North Sea gusts embitter tonight. The light over a car park buzzes and blurts like a hawk moth jittering in its glow. Strobe also to my canal wanderlust. My rented spokes creak. American prairie windmill. Beyond these slumped row houses, a hen harrier flits over darkening fields, careless for her white cravat, too hungry to fly anyway, but focused, flying into mist. Tomorrow, far south in a land arid for tulips, the Moroccan prayer caller will be buried among European storks wintering there. His minaret, a tulip built of anguish. Scrawl and glide, scrawl, scrawl and glide. Those beaks that ache, John Coltrane on oud. Wide wings soaring over qanats, canyons, and dust. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tim, for wonderful reading and the vibrancy of your images and the places you take us too. Very much appreciate. Before I introduce Ingrid Wendt, our second reader tonight, I just wanted to make a couple of announcements. We will be having a reading over at Tsunami from two Lane Literary Guild members, Charles Goodrich and Tom Titus, on Sunday, June 19th, from 4 to 5:30 p.m. That's at Tsunami Books, and that's 2585 Willamette Street, Eugene. And then I will be having a reading of my new book, which is coming out, called Galen's Legacy. And that will be on Thursday, June 16th from 7 p.m. to 8:30. And it would be wonderful to see all of you there. It's my book launch. And there will also be question and answers and a signing at the same time. We also want to remind you that the last, I believe it's on the 28th, we have our River Road Reading Series coming up as well. And you can access the 3 readers that will be coming up at that time, which is very exciting. Bruce Sedgwick, Yola Gomez, and Dale Camplin. And that will be from 4:30 to 6 and it's live and in person. It's at the River Road Annex, 1055 River Road. So there's lots of literary activity coming on for all of us as summer nears, and it's an exciting thing. So it is my great pleasure now to move on and talk with introduce Ingrid Wendt, who was, as I said before, one of the founders of the Lane Literary Guild. In fact, it was her idea that sparked the whole guild to come into fruition. And she is a Eugene poet, an editor and educator, author of 5 books of poems, and a guide into teaching writing in the classroom. She is co-editor of the Oregon Poetry Anthologies From Here We Speak, and in her image, Women Working in the Arts. She has taught at all educational levels, including the MFA program of Antioch University, and is a Fulbright Professor in Germany. Married for 48 years to the late poet, writer, and U of O Professor Ralph Salisbury, Ingrid is a certified scuba diver, bird watcher, photographer, classical pianist, organist, and member of the Eugene Vocal Arts. Recent poems appear in Poetry, Terrain, About Place, Valparaiso Poetry Review, Calyx, Cirque, and others. Newly returned from a month in Mexico, she will be reading poems that mourn what is passing from our lives and celebrate the glories that remain. And I just wanted to say about Ingrid that I had the good fortune of having one of my novels come out from the same press as her book, singing the Mozart Requiem. And we had a joint book signing back then in 1987. And so it's been remarkable and wonderful to have had this decades-long relationship. And I want to say about her poetry, we have, again, some wonderful images such as wading the inarticulate grass and fields ripe with robins. And she very wonderfully in her poem, Singing the Mozart Requiem, actually takes on the whole idea of conveying what that experience is like, which is certainly a major challenge. And in one of her poems, too, a more recent poem, she writes about the rainbow experience of the parrotfish, and she very joyously echoes Elizabeth Bishop, the poem The Fish. So without further ado, we will hear from Ingrid.
Thank you so much, Hank. Thank you for reminding me of our joint reading back in 1987. Wow. Yeah, we've known each other a long time, and I'm so happy we're friends. I want to thank you for inviting me tonight. I want to thank Wendy for setting all this up. It's great to be reading with Tim, to have heard your new poems, Tim. Thank you so much. And thank you to my listening audience, whoever you are, wherever you are. I believe there might be some people even from my roots in Aurora, Illinois, that might be here tonight. So I might read a poem for you folks. And yeah, Hank, you mentioned my fish poem, about the rainbow parrotfish. And yeah, that was a lot of fun to write. I am a scuba diver, although I have not done that for quite some time. It's expensive. And also, it's very gratifying to snorkel, so I do a lot of that. I'm not going to read that particular poem, but one I was going to read, and I've got my hands on it, I think, is a poem about snorkeling and the glories of the fish world. And this is one that some of my writing group helped me with. Yeah, and where did it go? While it's waiting for it to show up. Here we go. On the nature of fish identification, because I do have a kind of fascination with learning their names and identifying them when they pop up. On the nature of fish identification. And I will say in advance, this is kind of a long poem. Sometimes I think I want to write symphonies instead of, like string quartets or something. So please bear with me. Some say that tacking given names onto anything wild takes away its wonder. But I say that naming casts threads of connection, respect. And when, with face mask and snorkel, I once again trade my life's daily clutter for rapture of coral and reef, warm and easy as once I hung in the palm of conception. The names of fish I've met, mostly in books, but also in person, rise to the tip of my buckled up tongue. Stoplight parrotfish, angelfish, slippery dick, those that wiggle and those that dart, those that glide and those that simply hang in place on every level, mobiles of sergeant majors, bursts of firework flowers, refusing to fade, not even when squadrons of big blue tang cruise by. Fish who sway in clusters under overhangs. Hello, squirrel fish. Fish who go solo, rubbing top fins against water's top lid. Hey, needlefish. Fish whose names, in the absence of mental chatter, expand within me, transform into ethers of wonder, mystery, joy. Some things are still very right in this world. Yesterday, it was the juvenile cocoa damselfish I found with its youthful flashy colors, cobalt blue, atop a slender sunflower yellow belly, nothing like the dark adult it will soon become, the one who nips mildly at my pale, mild thighs, protecting its shallow laid eggs each time I enter and exit the water. Oh, how can I not long and long to keep returning, to gaze upon these shape-shifting constellations in constant slow motion, they who tolerate my trespass into their glory, my breath one with the songs of their names, my heart reeled in. That was such fun to write, and I thank my writing group for finding some things to improve on it. I wanted also to acknowledge that I am reading here tonight in Eugene, Oregon, in a house on land that was once the ancestral home of the Kalapuya people for untold centuries before the first wagon trains rolled in. And all of us living here today benefit from that theft. There's not enough recognition of that. I can't undo those wrongs. I confess I was kind of depressed for a while when I became fully aware of how that all took place. I was working on the Oregon Poetry Anthology, co-editing it. My part of that job was researching the tribal lyrics and including some of the first people's songs, which were never meant to be written down, but we wanted to honor them. And then also the pioneer poets, and these pioneer poets saying, oh, how wonderful this all is and everything. I got really depressed with their lack of recognition. But that was where they were coming from back then. So I can't undo the wrongs that were done to the Kalapuya people or return this land to them or to the condition in which it first was found, but I can do my part to honor and respect it and cherish that which remains of our landscape and all of the creatures on it, and love them and share that love. There were over 40 different tribal peoples in Oregon within its borders, speaking over 20-something different languages. And the next poem is going to reflect my coming to terms and awareness of that. It's titled Columbus and Me, and it talks about me as a very young person backpacking and staking a nylon tent and looking out over this vast, wonderful emptiness that felt like it was all mine. Remember those old movies of the pioneers and the explorers and all that? Well, I was one of them. Wow. Columbus and me. Coming fresh to this Oregon soil, the greatest thing was to hike far from any human demand and to sit looking over land empty of human influence, far as the eye could see. Horse Lake, catching the first rays of sun, brushing between the Three Sisters. No, those are mountains, the Three Sisters. Ridge after rolling green ridge, misted in silence. Or to camp at a bend in some river large and level enough for a tent. The simpler we said, the better. Our red nylon parachute roped under some branch overhead and staked giant columbine wide to the ground. 24 and an ocean away from my Illinois home. More than 20 years away from tonight, learning at last the names Kalapuya, Clatsop, Takelma, rethinking whole counties, Clackamas, Tillamook, Clatsop, Wallowa, how easy it was to sail, certain as morning, into a landscape no one human could ever have witnessed before. Not this rock, this riffle, not this bird song leading us on, such bounty falling into our hands. And that same kind of thing happened just a few months ago in Mexico at a place that I write about so often, a place that my late husband Ralph and I used to go. We used to go there. We had a wonderful writing residency quite some time back, and a lot of poems came out of that. And we stayed at this wonderful place that I could look out my window and see birds, and there's a lot of poems about that, about those birds. And there was a wonderful tree outside that window. And I've gone back after he passed in 2017, I've gone back twice myself alone now, three times. And this last time I looked for that tree and it wasn't there. And this is the same kind of poem, but it's not the Kalapuya people, it's the Mayan people. And I suddenly thought, oh my God. The poem is titled, And All Around the Same. Tree of the big black berries in every stage of temptation. Tree of kiskadee and dove, of mating and blooming and crooning, whose grandeur once, in a time of great privilege, I gazed out upon daily. Tree whose name no one could tell me, brought down during my too long absence from this strip of land between jungle and sea I've called my heart's second home, to make room for 3 new mansions currently under construction, replacing their owner's small, sprawling hotel still being dismantled by chisel and sledgehammer, shovel and drill. Good work, I've heard, for those descended from the ancestral Maya, whose unceded land, on which right now I'm staying, this used to be before it was bought out from under them. Workers who now live in dirt floor homes across the highway where visitors cannot see them. Tree felled easily after it first was killed by setting fire to the roots. Tree whose absence fills with banging and slamming and screeching. Tree whose long, slow, cruel death leaves my complicit heart stunned. So I'm going to lighten things up a little bit and read something from a different time in my life. I was thinking of how to structure this reading tonight, realizing that one of the great influences on me, although I didn't realize it until recently, and so unfortunately he's no longer on this earth to tell that how big an influence he had on me, was one of my graduate school professors, Bill Strange, who taught a class in William Blake. And I didn't really get Blake back then. I was 22, didn't really connect too much with the worlds he was describing. But one of the things that Bill Strange said was that Blake's poems of innocence and experience, there's really a third part to that. There are poems of innocence that as we come into this life, we are innocent, and then we have experience, and that sort of takes away that innocence. But there's a third part, which is coming back to innocence, and that Blake was all for coming back to that place of wonder and joy and beauty and discovery and enthusiasm. And one of the great things about being in my 70s is that I can start putting stuff together. And maybe those of you who are with me in an older age group know what I'm talking about. That's good. And it's good to be able to be open to new things, and that there are still some things very right in this world, as one of my poems just said. I'd like to also recognize all the horrible things around us, that it's difficult to write about joy and beauty and wonder when so many people are suffering in so many ways. In Buffalo, New York, in Ukraine, in Russia. Because Russians are suffering too. One of my mentors, William Stafford, famously said, every war has two losers. And that's very, very true. And there are Russian families suffering the losses of their sons and brothers and friends, just as the Ukrainians are. And Pablo Picasso, the artist, said, artists who live and work with spiritual values cannot and should not remain indifferent to a conflict in which the highest values of humanity and civilization are at stake. And I truly believe that. I also believe that that in Phyllis McGinley, another organ writer, I also believe almost the opposite is true. In times of unrest and fear, it is perhaps the writer's duty to celebrate, to single out some values we can cherish, to talk about some of the few warm things we know in a cold world. I'm talking more than reading, but I feel like it's important to recognize the suffering around us and keep ourselves strong by celebrating the few warm things we know in a cold world. And getting back to the theme of experience and innocence, I'm going to read an old poem. My granddaughter Gemma, when she was 2.5, was learning to play a board game with the whole family. And it was called Chutes and Ladders. Board game with Gemma. 2.5, she's playing her first board game ever, Chutes and Ladders. Has already mastered spinning the dial and taking turns. And when her mother chirps, I have a 5, a plastic red-suited bunny, small as a bracelet's charm, hop, hop, hops its way to a square in front of every other bunny on the board. Me too, a 5, her father exclaims. 6, grandfather springs ahead of them all. And then it's Gemma's turn. Such concentration in that index finger the size of a violet's stem. And when the needle stops, what is it, Mommy? A 1. Look, everybody, I have a 1, a 1, a 1. Looking back, this poem comes from the book Singing the Mozart Requiem, which is the book that Hank mentioned. Came out from the same press as his, Brighton Bush Books. And this is looking back on my own innocence when I was in 3rd grade. Linda in Sacramento might be watching. She was in that same 3rd grade class. So this is for you, Linda, if you're listening. You had long curls, but my mother kept cutting mine. On the nature of tact. Poor teacher. Oh, I should say, I had just learned what a white lie was. And I thought that was really weird. And then I told my first one. Those moments stick with you, right? On the nature of tact. Poor teacher, her new dress is ugly. The girl sees clearly. Polka dots, hundreds of little white lies exposed on black nylon, obvious as the permanent smell she, the girl, has nowhere to hide from. Who will sit next to her? How could her mother force on her curls like notebook spirals, blackboard stiff, her dignity shorter by 3 inches at least? How could the teacher believe her own words? Confidential as grade books, bending close. Why, dear, your hair looks so nice. Thank you, Miss Erickson. That's a pretty new dress. Childhood, another poem. This is a recent one, not published yet. And I'm dedicating this to my daughter, Martina Salisbury, who is also a poet. In a kingdom long, long ago, parents always knew the right thing to say at the very right time. And how they did that, I'll never stop envying. Like tonight, just one glance at the evening star, and there we are again. Play date ended, heading home in the blue Ford van. I'm schooling you in a childhood ritual I never truly held much stock in, but loved for its barefaced longing. Look, pumpkin, the very first star, make a wish. Mommy, you whispered, is there a crown on my head? Will this mother of yours, who should have been quicker, who could have said, wow, it's glowing, oh no, there it goes. Will this stumbling mother ever stop wishing she'd known a way to keep that luminous moment intact? And just as she's trying to figure out how to write this without being maudlin, you text from 3 time zones to the east. Sick Swan is saved after 23-mile odyssey by foot, car, and subway. Heart, I click. Wow, I write. Good night, dear princess. Sleep tight. And jumping to another place, another time. The first time Ralph and I did go to Acapulco, Mexico. The first line is also the title. All day, the fierce wind that began at 5 in the morning, dancing with patio chairs and table, blasting and whining and shaking. Windows and doors went on. Crests of waves doubled in number, charged the beach from a bay that just 2 days before had been tranquil, still. Outside to the west, the jumble of nearby palms was a frenzy of silk stockings rubbing together. Whispers magnified 10,000 times. And then, just as I was falling that night into sleep, a new sound, a low, comforting purr, a gentle inhalation, exhalation, regular, deep. a sound I'd never heard you make in your sleep before, a soft crunch of roasted bread with a musical edge. And when next morning at first light you rose and the sound went on, I recognized at last, as from the time before I was born, the steady, intimate breath of the sea. Words to use with caution. And this is my poem, which is out at the library, or out at the airport, thanks to the library. And my daughter Martina flew home from that airport just about a month and a half ago, and I had just learned that my poem was out there, and she found it. It's a sad and blank. Oh, there. Can you see me again? Okay. I want to thank the library for that amazing project. I'm just so thrilled to be part of it. And also I want to thank the Lane Literary Guild for carrying on this organization that I dreamed up years ago before there was email. We were sending out invitations to readings by mimeograph and sticking stamps on them. And we had no idea how many wonderful people would take over once Bill Sweet and I backed off and let other people. Thank you, everybody. Oh my gosh, Bill and I, and my husband Ralph was involved too. Never could have imagined how far you'd take this organization, and that I'd be reading to you tonight on my own computer, which didn't exist. Wow, thank you. Keep going. Words to use with caution, the poem that's at the library, and I only have a couple more to read before I close out. My phone, I had my timer on so I could see it, and it's blank. Words to use with caution. Oh, but they sounded so good when first I came across them. And so for a time, I passed them along. May memories bring you comfort. And then I lost the one with whom I shared 49 years. And then, not long after, I saw the bench along the river where he loved to sit and watch the never-ending constellations of ducks, ducklings, and herons shifting, wild geese gliding in for a landing, and off again they'd go. He'd sit because he couldn't walk much further, and I needed to walk at a faster pace, another 20 minutes or so, because he wanted to take care also of me, because he took such joy in simply being. No, that first time I went to the river alone and saw him not there, fierce and sudden tears punched and did not stop until back home, a neighbor with griefs of her own put her arms around me and held me a long, long, silent time. Friends, those memories nearly knocked me right down. We have to be careful how we use those cliches, you know? It's hard to know what to say to people when they've lost someone, but may memories bring you comfort is not one of those. And I used to say them too, those words. Yes, to close out, because I'm pretty sure I'm at the end of my time. I'm going to read a poem, another poem by Akumal. I'm going back and forth in place and time, as you are noticing. I'm going to end with a poem that happens along the Willamette River. But this one is the tree that the other poem talks about. And this poem took a long time to write. I'm not someone who wakes up early every morning and finishes a poem and then goes back and revises it. I will sometimes get an idea for a poem. Don't wake up that easily. So this one's been going off and on the burner for quite some time. But I started thinking to myself, what am I doing traveling so much? I'm sure people have wondered that too. And the poem is titled Ars Poetica. It's kind of asking myself, why do I write? What am I doing here? Down in Mexico, in Acrumal. Ars Poetica. You ask what I'm doing so far from home? And what can I say? Oh, I was going to preface this with a quote by Bertolt Brecht. What times are these when to talk about trees is almost a crime because it implies silence on so many wrongs? We're in those times. And thank goodness for other writers, some of whom are in this room with me tonight, who celebrate trees and celebrate the beauties and the glories around us that keep us strong and remind us what it is we wake up for and keep each other strong. You ask what I'm doing so far from home, and what can I say? Most days I study a tree, and a big outlandish tree it is, offering big round berries in every stage of temptation, a hodgepodge of green, maroon, and black in each and every fist-sized clump, a pantry of non-stop avian glee. Why it pleases me so much I cannot say, but I love to peer, sometimes, yes, uneasy in my privilege, a desk, a roof, and time, down upon large glossy leaves and the one bare branch in the middle, which yesterday posted the mating dance of the light brown Yucatan doves and their coupling, the briefest of piggyback thwacks. What's more, delight compounded, the resident great Kiskadee who claims this whole entire tree as his own, left them alone, although on other days he loves to rest himself off and on that very branch when he isn't flitting deep into the deep green pyrotechnics of berries and leaves, returning with a big black berry on his big black beak, gulping it down. Some days I'm even luckier, catch a glimpse of his yellow gold crown, a crescent sun flashing once and sinking back into its own horizon, so fast the gesture is lost on its mate, flirting with berries elsewhere in this inexhaustible tropical tree, but not lost on me, beguiled and trying to capture that high-speed image with just one click, and failing over and over, and also suspending, forgive me, our struggles back home to keep this whole blessed planet intact. But yours is a question that's also been nibbling at me. One that here in the Yucatan jungle, close to the sea, I've not been able to banish until, lo and behold, just this morning, a pair of jaw-dropping starburst recognitions rose and stunned me. Perhaps the most gluttonous soul in this whole spectacle is not Sir Kiskadee after all, but the person writing this poem, who went to these extremes to get as far away as she could from constant news of hate that's everywhere and all-consuming, to fill the empty larder of her spirit with the crooning and blooming and fruiting which has kept our sacred world humming since life lifted into being. And now, instead of bemoaning what the world has become, her business will be, back home among you, to scout out every last high-speed antic and steadfast miracle still remaining throughout the vast landscapes around us, each with its own dear casts of characters for whom the concept of future doesn't exist, and to celebrate every last morsel. Stay tuned. And one more, because I do see my time is up. What they saw on their weekly river walk, taking turns pushing his chair. And this is along the Willamette River here in Eugene, and I dedicate this to my friends Linda and her late husband Martin Sage. Linda told me this story. First to snare their attention was hawk, hovering, fluttering, just over water's smooth skin. and then the distraction. Mallard from nearby delta ponds, for some unknown reason quacking close at their heels, so that when at last they turned back to the river, hawk was now high, high, high in the air, darting around as hawks are not wont to do. And why? Just ahead of hawk sped nimble osprey, break-dancing solo with big, big fish in its talons. Holy cow! Hawk with its speed behind osprey's agility, dodging, circling, 5 minutes or more it must have been, and then out of proverbial nowhere, bald eagle sails in behind hawk in hot pursuit of agile osprey with big, big fish in its talons. And just when it can't get any stranger, lo and behold, crow flaps to catch up with eagle, sailing after hawk in hot pursuit of osprey with big, big fish, a scene straight out of Aesop or Native American myth. Who the foolish one? Who the wise? And then fish fell, who knows where, and there was no more story to tell. How brief that whole unpredictable sequence that plays and replays in the mind, in the sharing. How long it kept them going, my friends, flown by wonder, far from the body's ruthless, steady decline. And later, yes, later, even then. Thank you.
Thank you, Ingrid, for your vivid images and your special areas of travel, both psychically and literally. Appreciate that. And so today we're going to have some question and answers. I don't see anything in the chat in form of questions, but a lot of response to our poets, vivid responses. Did you see anything, Wendy, in terms of questions?
There aren't any, there are lots of really nice comments, which is fabulous. I don't see any questions right now in my email, which isn't unusual. So.
Okay, all right. Well, let me start with Tim. Tim, would you say that your poems are especially stimulated by seasons or seasonal change?
Yeah. I mean, I live out in the country. I have about an acre and a half that I try to garden, both ornamentals and fruit, and a vegetable garden. But it's in this huge valley, and everywhere I look, I'm seeing the seasons change and shift, and so yeah, I'm not looking at a classroom like Ingrid has done, or you've done, Hank.
Yeah, right. Would you say that there's, I don't know, it seemed to me that the nature is highly animated for you. I mean,
oh yeah,
like even the yellow jackets have a certain personality.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and we're all in this the thick of it together, and to think that somehow or another we're above it all or in charge of it all has had disastrous consequences.
Yes. Okay. Great. And Ingrid, I guess a parallel question would be that you seem to have a special contact or intimate connection with the sea, with ocean, and even that's been mentioned in some of the commentary that's come up tonight. Would you like to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, especially for a kid growing up in the Middle West, I grew up in Aurora, Illinois, which had a river, and that river was very important to me. Then my family would vacation on the banks or on the shores of Lake Michigan every summer. My mother grew up near Lake Michigan, and that was like the ocean. You couldn't see across it. And it seems like I've always had connections with water at some point. Coming out to the West Coast was, oh my God, the seeing Devil's Elbow. The first poem I ever wrote out in Oregon was about Devil's Elbow State Park, and As it turns out that my late husband, Ralph Salisbury, when he told me as we were recording that his first poem was about Devil's Elbow State Park, I knew we were fated to be together. But no, that's no. The my third book of poems, or my fourth book, is titled Surgeonfish, and at the beginning of that book, I name all the bodies of water that I've either lived next to or snorkeled in or dived in. I've dived in the Red Sea. I've dived in Hawaii. I've dived off of the coast of Mexico. I've dived in a Norwegian fjord. And the life under the water, underwater is just another. It's another planet. It's just another. It's just, it captivates my attention. But just the sounds of the water. We all floated in water once. It's just.
Yes.
It's just been part of me. I write about it a lot.
That's great. That's wonderful. Tim, a question from Figaro Vaca. Describe your process for winnowing down what I assume starts with a large number of words to a critical few.
Oh man, that's a hard question. Lately, it seems like I'm writing shorter poems, and my critique group is trying to encourage me to write something a little longer to extend.
I'm trying to short.
But I don't know. It's a really long process with some poems. I mean, I read poems this evening. The one that starts in Amsterdam and ends up in Morocco has been in the hopper probably 5 years or something, and it's been out, and I've gotten, these really encouraging rejection notes specifically about it. And, maybe it took meeting a Moroccan guy at the dog park and realizing that the title was a song about change and about changes from John Coltrane that put it in its right orbit. But beyond that, I don't know. I mean, you have to try the poems out in some kind of an audience. My wife Carol went through my list of 15 poems and got me down to 9. So, and partially that's because there are things that travel orally without being able to look at the written version, and others are things that you muse over on the page.
Yeah, right. Very good. Ingrid, you mentioned that you write also about loss. Can you talk a little bit about that? About how that's in some ways an interesting launching off point for you?
That's an interesting question. I think we all suffer losses all the time, and I read some poems about that. Losing my husband was a big one, but losing my parents, everything that we love, everything that's around us is passing from our lives. I'm looking out my window right now and I'm seeing the rhododendrons that are blooming, and soon they're just glorious, but soon they will be shriveling. And then something new will come. The Mozart Requiem, which I sang with Eugene Concert Choir, and I've sung at other places, other choirs. I wrote about the Mozart Requiem, which a Requiem Mass is about grief and loss. A week ago, I sang with Eugene Concert Choir at the Holt Center. We sang the Brahms Requiem. It's about grief. It's about loss. It's inseparable from life. And there's a quote by T.S. Eliot that I use as a preface for my poem, Singing Mozart Requiem. For who will both mourn and rejoice at once and for the same reason?
Mm-hmm.
And if we're fully alive and fully aware of the moments, we're also aware that they're passing. So it's just inherent there.
Yes.
Somewhat along those lines, I have a poem that, for one reason or another, I've never published, but one of the lines from it is, "Everything growing falls."
Yes. Right.
And we have time just about for one more question for each of you. And in following up with that, Tim, you have the poem of dancing with the children in, I think, the aftermath of COVID, that we move forward even so, even though all the swimming pools are closed and so forth. Would you like to talk a little bit about that whole idea of advancing forward in spite of?
Yeah, I don't know. Can we allow ourselves that leisure? We just took a short little trip to Walla Walla for my wife's birthday, and in passing back home through Bend, we stopped off and had outdoor meals at the food truck with my middle kid, Maddie, and didn't get inside their house or anything, but she wasn't feeling all that great. And then as we were headed back over the mountain, she texted us and said that even though she had tested negative on Thursday evening, on Sunday morning after we met for coffee and our breakfast outdoors, she went home and tested again, and she's positive. You know, that's what happens when you're a first grade teacher in Redmond. So I'm not sure I'm quite there yet. I want to be.
Yes. I don't know. I found myself that with COVID, I just couldn't write the way I normally had, prior to the COVID. I was changed in some way, and the only way I could move forward in my writing was to write about it. And it was very different from anything I'd ever written before. So anyway, that's my piece of it. Okay, and the last part. Go ahead. Did you want to add something?
Well, we can also talk about the epidemic of mass shootings.
Yeah.
And racist.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've all through it.
Which is an epidemic in this country. And
Yeah.
as a kid who grew up around a little of that during forced busing and other things in Fort Wayne, Indiana, I'm also a Midwesterner by upbringing. I kind of wanted to feel like it was enough as a country guy in my adulthood to be non-racist, to embrace whoever passed my, across my path in life.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm finding that that's too safe, and it leaves others unsafe. And so I'm really provoked right now, not sleeping particularly well, trying to figure out what it means. Maybe what I'll be doing in the next 18 months is trying to figure out how to write an anti-racist manifesto.
All right. Well, thank you. And Ingrid, I just one other question I have for you is, when I know you're going to read, I know probably I'm going to travel a bit. And can you just tell us a bit about how travel has been a stimulation for you? I mean, I know it's been apparent in the poems you read tonight, but if you just maybe sum up a little bit about that.
I guess I'm just voracious for new experiences, and I've been so incredibly lucky. I just never dreamed that I would do as much traveling as I have in my lifetime. I think part of that is my husband, Ralph Salisbury's connections. He first became a Fulbright Professor in Germany, and we had traveled only once to Europe when our daughter was 4, and then we went back when she was 11, went back for 3 months, and then I got invited, and we kept going back for conferences, and then we got invited to go various different places, and then I started getting invited, and he went with me. So I think a lot of it was work related. I did a lot of teaching, conferencing overseas. So wasn't just travel for the sake of travel. Ralph always said, and I fully agreed, is that we wanted to be we wanted to learn from other people, be part of the community and blend in. We hated being with other Americans, and we hated being singled out as tourists. So we just really we chose to live simply, and just had wonderful experiences. I have a poem I didn't read tonight. It's called Pilgrim, because I felt like there are parts of myself that would respond in different places that we lived. Like in Norway, I just felt like I was rooted to the bones of the earth. And in Germany, in different places, different parts of my body would respond different ways. It's hard to describe.
Thank you so much. Thank you both so much.
I want to add to what Tim said, though, about the racism. Because just this morning, my daughter and I were having a conversation. We were texting, and she posted something by Yloma Olu. I can't pronounce her name. The woman who wrote "So You Want to Talk About Race," and I highly recommend that book. I thought you might want to read it. Anybody listening, "So You Want to Talk About Race," and she says, and the author says, "I don't know how many different ways I can express how it feels to know that this country will always open up the violent destruction of our lives to young white men angry at their lack of purpose and power. We will never be safe until white manhood is defined by something other than the quest for domination over others." And that's sort of the history of our human race, is the quest for domination over others. And that relates to what we have done to the Native Americans. It relates to what's going on in Ukraine right now. It relates to the Black Lives Matter movement. It relates, and it's also the violence in the words we use without thinking. We use so many violent words in our language, like let's hit the road, kill the lights. I've got a poem about that, which I didn't read. And I think we also need to think about defining ourselves not by being dominant over others, but there's also a lot of defining ourselves by not being better than others, or by trying to be better than others. That's how we define ourselves. We're at least better than them.
Yeah.
We are not that. Defining ourselves by what we are not.
Yeah.
It's time to stop that.
It's seeing the world horizontally rather than vertically, rather than hierarchical.
There you go. There you go. So I have more work to do, as do you, Tim.
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me as a kid who grew up in a white evangelical household in Indiana is that we're always hearing how the Black pastors are shepherding their damaged flocks. I just wonder when the white pastors of the tradition that I grew up in and have struggled with my entire life, when they're going to step forward and acknowledge the failure of their shepherding.
We're going to need to wrap it up tonight. Thank you. I appreciate both your comments that way. All right. Well, thank you both for your readings tonight and your thoughts. Yeah. And thanks again. And we'll be back in September. So thank you very much.
In one form or another. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Ingrid.
Thank you, Tim, Hank, Wendy. Bye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Take good care.